What is good, Tesla family? It's Ray J back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's going on with Tesla, SPY, Nvda, the QQQ, and a couple of other tickers. I'm going to break down what's going on with the overall market, what you should be watching for as time progresses, and why tomorrow is going to be a very important day as we have the FOMC meeting, and whatever's announced may cause some high volatility for Tesla and many other tickers. So I'm going to break down when on earth is the rate hike decision coming out, when is Jerome Powell going to be giving his speech tomorrow, and all of these things could affect the market and Tesla as we have some very important levels to discuss. But before I break anything down about all this information, before I get into any more details, let me just mention a couple of things. I am personally not a financial planner, so take none of this as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Webull, the link down below, and deposit any amount of money into the account, you are guaranteed up to 12 free stocks. The offer ends very soon, and it's in just about 8 days, so check it out before they run out. Anyways, let's break down what's going on with Tesla. So Tesla was up 0.46% for the day. We saw Tesla pop a little bit as we opened for this liquidity grab before it came right back down to 261. Then after that, Tesla got a bounce and started pushing as time went on towards this 267.5 area. I was thinking Tesla would get very close to 270, but we came just short as we rejected off either the 50 or the 200 EMAs, which were very close to one another. And Tesla still managed to hold up, closing barely in the green. But the question is, how on earth will this thing move for tomorrow, in my honest opinion? Now, this is going to be very dependent on the market. We could see a little bit of upside in another attempt to try to get above this 200 EMA. But typically, as we approach these FOMC meetings, the market tends to be very sideways. So even if Tesla does try to break out a little bit, there may be some high volatility at the very start, but then it's going to likely just slow down and trade sideways as we approach the rate hike decision. So when is the decision coming out? Tomorrow basically is going to be broken up in two different sectors. First off, at about 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time or New York time, we have the interest rate hike decision coming out by the Fed. This is going to be announced on the headlines, on the news, and things like that. And this is going to be very impactful for the Fed's policies, what the Fed does for the future, what happens to the markets, and the future of monetary policy as well. And then the second part of the day is going to be at 2:30 p.m. when Jerome Powell gives his speech during the Fed conference. So these are two separate things. Make sure you're prepared for this. This is going to cause some high volatility. I will break down how this may affect the market in just a couple of minutes. But just as a reminder, when we look at CPI, we have been seeing all items kind of going up a little bit in the CPI side because of the fact that energy is continuing to skyrocket. We're continuing to see oil prices going up and up and up, crude oil as well. And this is very, very important. Now, this has a very big ripple effect on inflation as a whole, and this is why all items inflation is starting to go up a bit. Some sectors are driving it a lot more than others, and that's why core CPI or CPI without food and energy is still on a downtrend. For that reason, because the Fed prioritizes core over all items CPI, as they have more control over core, the Fed is incentivized to not really raise rates again, at least during this cycle. But there is a risk of them doing it again because of the fact that energy is continuing to soar up. And we are starting to see more and more signs of the economy still not necessarily contracting to the same extent that the Fed wants. So we saw the market kind of like, especially with the futures dropping a little bit as we closed. We managed to actually drop and try to balance, but we're still kind of right, at least for our close. Some stocks like Meta and Tesla managed to close quite green, but others out there were just not in the same level. Now, one thing that's worth noting for tomorrow is when we look at the Fed Watch tool, it is saying that there's a 99% chance the Fed is going to either pause or skip during this meeting for tomorrow. And most of the time, the large majority of the time, this is accurate, and this is likely what's going to happen. The market is not priced in a rate hike for this meeting, so I think it's very likely the Fed is not going to raise rates during this meeting for tomorrow, and this could be a little bullish for the markets just temporarily. However, that does not mean the market's going to pump forever, because when Powell gives his speech later on, okay, he could hint towards more rate hikes for either November or December. There could be one more coming for the end of the year during the later FOMC meetings. And I think that the Fed would have to be watching inflation first to see the next CPI and PCE before making that decision. But I think that there is a chance that's going to happen, as we've been seeing a slight uptick in all items CPI. So there is a risk that this could slow the market down as well when Powell gives his speech, if he does turn aggressive or a little bit more hawkish. So we have to be very careful. I'm going to break this down more specifically in just a few minutes when it comes to the charts. Anyways, when it comes to Tesla, some Model Y owners, there's this news coming out right here, return to gas-powered SUVs and trucks. And I could totally understand that, but just remember that this is just a small percentage of them switching to like Lucid and Rivian. This is once again very subjective. There are a lot of people that love their Tesla models, other ones who have very different views. And that is completely fine. Everyone has the right to have their own opinion in my honest view. However, Tesla still has very high brand loyalty. I saw a very, very nice survey. It has relatively high brand loyalty compared to its predecessors, compared to other companies out there. The Model Y has high loyalty compared to like the Mustang Mach E, for example, and other SUVs. And once again, others out there, many people do love Tesla's and its capabilities and its functionalities, and other people could have different views. That's completely fine. But I do believe the Model Y with the new upgrades is still going to be a very, very big hit. Not to mention the Model S owners are very excited about their products, and I just still am super excited with the Cybertruck. Tesla has a very big base, and we're seeing almost 2 million plus potential reservations for the Cybertruck, according to recent data. So that is still a very good sign for the company. That makes me very optimistic nonetheless. But for the time being, I mean, if there's going to be more and more people switching, it could happen, right? People will always have their different views. Many people don't like the idea of having to charge your car during long trips, and that's completely understandable and fine. But one thing I want to tell you is that it does not necessarily hurt Tesla to a large extent, because the majority of Tesla owners are quite loyal. They love the cars. They love the fact that it's improving the environments to some extent, or it has the potential to do even more as Tesla reduces carbon emissions per production per vehicle, right? There's a possibility Tesla will be reducing them big time as years progress. As of right now, they're not really, they're not super clean cars just yet, because it takes a lot of resources to produce them, of course. But people love the vision and etc. So I'm still completely fine with Tesla, and I just think that there's so many bullish catalysts from the Cybertruck to other products. Anyways, enough about me ranting about this. Let's talk about some data in the charts. All right, Goldman Sachs is neutral on Tesla, which is decent. The price-price ratio is dropping just a little bit, just a tiny bit for Tesla, so it's still kind of flat as Tesla's barely holding up. And finally, none of this data really matters that much other than this short interest. Tesla is still heavily shorted. As of yesterday, we saw about 42 million shares short. So that's the overall short sales volume on a day-to-day basis. There is still a lot of shorting going on in Tesla compared to before, so this could have a negative effect for the price in the future. But for now, I'm not going to focus too much on like the next few months or anything like that. Let's just talk about tomorrow specifically, because we have some big things going on. So just remember, 2 o'clock p.m. is when we have the interest rate hike decision. Then at 2:30 p.m. Eastern time, we have the press conference with Jerome Powell's speech. So what does this mean for Tesla? Well, what tends to happen is we see some very high amounts of volatility when we open. Tesla might actually try to pop a little bit since we have a bullish wedge possibly developing. I think it's going to try to fight for 267 so long as there's no bad news. Then Tesla's going to try to fight 267. If it manages to break it could go a little higher, but then I think that it's just not going to last, and Tesla's going to come back down and just start trading sideways. So when we open, look for a little pop, then some sideways price action. Is going to be very boring for the first couple of hours, okay? When we open, there could be some volatility for a little pop. Then after that, expect some sideways boring price action. Tesla's going to range trade around this like 265 zone probably, and not really do anything until we get to the rate hike decision. That's what I think the market's going to do. Typically, when we have FOMC meetings, the market is very sideways and boring. Then the decision comes out at 2 p.m. Then Tesla should make a big pop. I think the market's going to pop a little bit to the upside because of the fact that the Fed is announcing they're not raising rates this cycle. And I think the market will temporarily pop, so we could see Tesla get close to like either 267, maybe even 270. Then it's going to come back down right before the press conference. And then during this press conference, Jerome Powell gives his speech, and whatever he says will dictate how the market moves. Okay, so he could cause the market to pump and cause Tesla to go back to the 270s, or he could give Tesla a big rug pull, and Tesla and the whole market could come all the way back down, and Tesla could sink back down below 261 to potentially 257, which is where the gap support happens to be if we break below 260. Okay, so hopefully this isn't too complicated, excuse me. Let me make this simple. Look for a little pop as soon as we open, a little drop, sideways price action as time goes on. The rate hike decision comes, we should pop, then potentially come back down. And then Jerome Powell gives his speech. The guy either pumps us really hard, that's when the real move comes, or the guy's going to cause a rug pull. All right, that's what I'm seeing for tomorrow. Hopefully that's not too complicated. For SPY, it's the same thing. This thing has a potential wedge developing, so we may make an attempt to get back to 444 when we open. Then expect some boring sideways price action between 444 and 442, back and forth and back and forth. Then the rate hike decision comes. We see SPY get a pop to 445, which is where our 200 EMA happens to be. And then we may reject off that, trade sideways again. Then Jerome Powell gives his speech. Jerome Powell may pump SPY back up to 446.5 or even 448, or he may cause the market to start sinking and cause SPY to come all the way back down below 440 for a big rug pull, and then the market could downtrend even more. It all depends on what Jerome Powell says. I will speak more about that tomorrow, but for now, just be prepared for that. I think the same thing is going to happen to Aapl. Aapl might pop in the morning as we have another wedge developing, and Aapl is still holding up. I was talking about Aapl closing green, and that's what we got again. I was talking about 180 on Aapl since yesterday, and today we hit 179.6, so it came very close to our projection. So for Aapl, we have a potential cup and handle. Should get a pop towards this 180 area when we open, get a little bit close to it, then cool back down, start trading sideways, be very, very boring in the 178s. It's going to be very boring for the first couple of hours. Then when the rate hike decision comes, we could see a pop towards 180 again, come back down. Then it's time for Jerome Powell's speech. If Powell pumps us, 181 is possible for Aapl. If Powell gives us the rug pull, Apple's going to come back down to 177.5 and start sinking. It all depends on Jerome Powell. For the QQQ, I'm seeing the same thing as SPY. Look for a little pop towards 371, maybe around this 370 zone in the morning. Watch it get rejected, come back down and start trading sideways around the 369s, going back and forth and back and forth. Very boring price action. All right. And then when we get to the rate hike decision at 2 p.m., watch for a pop towards 372, a rejection off the 200 EMA in the 372s to come right back down. Then Jerome Powell gives his speech, which comes later. If Powell pumps us, 374 plus is on the table, at least above 372. If Powell gives us the rug pull, we could see the QQQ come all the way back down to 366. Hopefully that is very, very understandable. For Nvidia, it's the same thing. I think Nvidia is looking not necessarily like that strong. It's kind of flat right now. We're kind of range bound. We did establish a higher low, but we're kind of just range bound. So I think that we're going to be stuck between 442 and about this 425 area. Maybe like 430 specifically if that doesn't necessarily hold, but I think it's just going to go back and forth and back and forth. It may pop tomorrow morning, try to test 440, reject off that, then just trade sideways but between 442 and like 430, going back and forth and back and forth. This is one of the most volatile stocks. That's why the range is so big. It's going to be very boring. Then the decision comes, we may see a pop towards 442, if not 446. Somewhere there we get a pop, come back down. Then Jerome Powell will dictate which way the market goes during his speech. If Powell gives Nvidia and the market a big pump, we could see Nvidia approach 450 again. If Powell gives us the rug pull, Nvidia could come tanking towards 420. It all depends on Jerome Powell. I expect some high volatility nonetheless. Microsoft is likely going to trade sideways around this 328 area. We may get a pop thanks to the rate hike decision, with the Fed like not giving us a rate hike. 330 to 331 is possible, a rejection off that, then sideways price action. Then Jerome Powell's speech could push this thing towards 332 plus, or give us the rug pull towards 325 or below that. For AMD, we may see the same thing going on, very sideways price action, but there's a possible inverse head and shoulders here, similar to Nvidia. I think that we may just be stuck between 103 and about this is like 100, a little bit below 100. Going back and forth in the morning. During the rate hike decision, it could test 103, if not 104, then come back down. Then Jerome Powell gives his speech. If Powell pumps us, 105 plus is possible. If Powell gives us the rug pull, this thing could come tanking down below 98, and that is very much a real possibility. For Netflix, just to be very blunt, we actually got a little bounce off 390, which is what we were talking about. Off Netflix, there's a potential wedge developing on it too. This has potential. It might actually kind of gap down tomorrow a little bit towards this 395 area. It may trade sideways, get a little pop when we open and come back down, get a one pop towards 400 once the rate hike decision comes out, then come back down. And then Powell will determine if we keep pushing into the 400s, if we get very close to like 405 plus, or if we end up sinking back down to 390 or lower. It all depends on Jerome Powell. The VIX is very indecisive. It could go either way. There's a possible head and shoulders developing, but at the same time, it's holding the 50 EMA. So if it bounces, it could always go the opposite direction. The VIX is in the middle. It could go either way. But one thing that's kind of concerning for the bulls would be the fact that we have a potential inverse head and shoulders developing on the dollar index. The dollar is at this 200 EMA. So if the dollar comes down to retest this, maybe the market pops in the morning. But if the dollar ends up holding this over the next few days and the dollar starts pumping thanks to Jerome Powell, this could cause the market to slow down. There's a chance that this may cause the rug pull. So there's a risk of Jerome Powell slowing the market down because of this. So just be very careful. The dollar is suggesting that there's a real possibility of some downside for the stock market. If this inverse head and shoulders holds. So we're going to be watching to see if that ends up being the case. Coinbase is looking kind of weak right now. We could see it retest 76, then try to bounce. But the thing about this would be that we have this very important demand zone around the 75.5 to 76 zone. So I could see it dropping a little bit, then trying to bounce off that, trading sideways for the time being. And whether or not this thing ends up breaking below 75 is going to depend on Powell. It could come down to like 69 or so, or this thing could start pushing back up above 81 if Jerome Powell causes the pump. It all depends on him. The last couple of tickers we have are Google. This is going to trade sideways around 138 in my opinion. It looks very stationary. If we get a pump thanks to Powell, 140 plus is going to be tested. We could break above that and start pushing. If Powell causes the rug pull, we could see Google break below 138. I'm not going to try to predict exactly what Powell's going to say or cause. I just want to be open-minded, but there's always a risk of either direction. Amazon's looking a little bit weaker than expected. If we're bullish, we want to see this thing get above 140. If that's the case, then Powell can pump it. If we're bearish, it's going to break down below this 135 area. If that's the case, it could get very close to 133. If 133 comes, that could be because of Powell. We have a possible head and shoulders developing, so there's a risk of Amazon coming down to 133, but no promises. It depends on Powell. That's another factor. So we're going to be watching what Jerome Powell says later on. Meta has pumped as we expected. I told you Meta may see some upside, and that's what happened today. We have a potential inverse head and shoulders on Meta. If we're bullish thanks to Powell, if Powell pumps the markets, 310 is on the table. If Powell causes the rug pull, we're going to see this thing come all the way back down to 297. We're going to be watching this all very carefully. So with that said, I thank you all so much for listening, and we'll see what happens tomorrow. This is going to be a very big day. Tesla has a potential inverse head and shoulders, so there's a chance Tesla's going to try to rebound, but no promises because the dollars suggest that the exact opposite could happen. So technicals are very mixed going into tomorrow, at least when it comes to the way Jerome Powell may move the markets. So with this wedge developing, there's a good chance that Tesla may get a little pop in the morning once again, come back down, then trade sideways for a couple of hours, get one pop thanks to the rate hike decision, come back down, then react to Jerome Powell. Powell could pump Tesla back into the 270s or higher levels and make this inverse head and shoulders valid to push Tesla higher, or Powell could invalidate this and cause a rug pull and make Tesla drop all the way back down to 257, if not 260, depending on how low it goes. Okay, so hopefully this is as clear as possible. Please take care, everyone. Do what you have to do. And I will most definitely see you guys tomorrow when we have the big FOMC meeting. That's going to determine which way this market ends up going. All right. Thank you for listening. Have a good one. And I'll see you guys tomorrow in the morning for the big update. Thank you and peace out.